This is the MSS1 from Minisforum. It's Strix Halo, 128 gig. It's a great machine learning platform if you're in the AMD space. And connected to it, I have a $9,000 RTX Pro 6000 connected via USB 4 V2, 80 gigabit. Yeah, it's unholy. I had to check. If we combined a 96 gig GPU with 128 gigs of shared VRAM in, a DDR5 8000, does Mr. Data fall out the other side? Is this the ultimate AI super insane powerhouse? The real star of the show here is the MSS1. That's what this video is about. I just wanted to try a RTX Pro 6000 on this platform just to see if it would work. And it does in Linux. Windows struggles. It says that there's not enough resource allocation. But the real star of the show here, like I say, is the MSS1. So let's unbox and take a closer look at the MSS1 before we get into the AI experiments. Oh, and that's Comfy UI running on Windows, even without the RTX Pro 6000. Yeah, it's running natively on Windows without WSL and everything works. I wrote a guide for that on the forum. We'll talk about that. We'll go on a BIOS tour. We'll test the performance of this. Maybe you just want one of these for gaming and ultimate portability because it's got a PCIe slot and a ton of expansion options and everything else. Yeah, let's dive in. Let's take a look at what Minisforum has wrought here. I'm really excited about Strix Halo in general, but also, yeah, this is a pretty nice little machine, and there's a guide and a how-to, and you can run some AI, get some ideas for experiments that you might run. Okay, let's dive in. Okay, it's not time for this yet. There, Windows is a little slow on the uptake. So this is the Ryzen AI Max 395 Plus with 128 gigabytes of memory. The 128 gigabytes of memory is shared between the CPU and the GPU, which is the Radeon 8060S. The 8060S is also very special. This is a GPU that's built into the CPU. That part's not really super special, but it's the performance. This is a little preview, I think, of the future of what we can expect from APUs. If you're not familiar with, codename Strix Halo, it's a laptop chipset, but it has showed up a lot in many PCs and other form factors because it is kind of a nice platform for AI. The reason that it's a nice platform for AI is because the GPU has access to a ridiculous amount of memory bandwidth. It has as much memory bandwidth as a Threadripper system, just a Threadripper X quad channel configuration, upwards of 220 gigabytes per second. That means that you can run AI models on the GPU with, say, a Vulkan backend or even a HIP backend with ROCm. This is actually ROCm 7. I went to AMD at Austin to visit, and ROCm 7 really is launching for CDNA. It's all about CDNA in the enterprise. RDNA is AMD GPUs, and ROCm 7 does have some stuff in it for RDNA GPUs. And in AMD slides, they were very toe in the water with ROCm. And on day zero, a couple of rough edges for RDNA on the ROCm 7 launch, but just a few days later, it's not even been a week at the time that I'm shooting this. ROCm 7 from the nightlies, running on Windows with Comfy UI. This is an amazing accomplishment from the AMD engineering team. It's running natively on Windows. I'm running Python 3.12. And so for the AI stuff, this is pretty incredible. But before we get to the AI stuff, let's talk about the capabilities of the system, overall performance, and everything else. Tearing down our Minisforum MSS1 Max. It's got the really nice premium metal case, as you'd expect. And inside, there's not really anything unexpected. On the bottom, we've got a power supply fan at the front. And you can see that we've got room for our half-height, half-length expansion slot here. Note that you could add a U.2 drive or something like that on the bottom here with an adapter card. I've got our A1000 from NVIDIA that I'm trying to put in here. I've taken the bracket off to make it a little easier to show you. The power supply connection at this bottom edge crowds things a little bit. So you got to take the screws out and move the cable around in order to get the card in. But once you get the card in, it does clear. It's just a little bit of a tight connection. On the top side, we've got the double blower design, which keeps things adequately cool for our Strix Halo. And then we've got our M.2 connections at the front. Now remember, one of our M.2 is a single PCIe Gen 4 lane. The other one is 4 lanes, so the operating system boot drive, 4 lanes there. And there is ample room for a heatsink or something like that if you want to add it. You can see we've also got our MediaTek Wi-Fi at the front. Standard issue for Strix Halo, pretty much. And then the expansion header. If you're curious about the expansion header or being able to daisy chain power, be sure to check out the Minisforum installation manual where it's explained a little better. Taking the cover off, we also learned the location of our Wi-Fi antennas. It's just behind the front plastic bezel. So that should, even with our metal case, that should give it ample range. And I do like the Wi-Fi antenna connectors being at the front rather than the back, just because at the back, with all the cables and everything going on at the back, you tend to get a lot of interference and blocking and shadowing, and this is really the best place these antennas could have been located internally. I definitely like to see the hefty metal construction, and I definitely like to see the light-on name brand power supply. These are good options that Minisforum has gone with. We're just going to run through a quickie tour of the BIOS on the MS-S1 Max. It's 1.03, there was a BIOS update for that, so there may be another one after that. Power limit setting out of the box by default is balanced. I've found setting it to performance, you can get a little bit more performance. You do have PSS support and no execute mode. You've got some options for TPM and trusted computing. On the onboard devices setting, you can toggle on and off resize bar. It's on by default. SR-IOV support is also there, as is USB-C charging mode. You get some options if you want to turn on NVMe RAID mode. I don't recommend NVMe RAID mode. And then you can disable some of the built-in devices, like you could disable the built-in, WLAN or one of the LAN ports or something like that if you wanted to. Under hardware monitor, you can fine-tune fan settings for the system fan, the SSD fan, and the CPU fan. You can also configure the network stack to enable UEFI network booting, and it also has some of the AMD CBS menu options. And so under CPU common options, you can configure things there like SVM lock, Northbridge IO, IOMMU, which is on by default. You've also got options to enable some iGPU options, including specifying the frame buffer size. However, note newer versions of the Adrenaline driver from AMD also let you do that in the GUI. Doesn't always work on the Strix Halo platform, but it does work on the 1.03 BIOS. You can also set the system to come on automatically in the event that it loses power. And then you've got some SMU options in terms of power delivery, temperature, and the maximum, TJ max temperature. That's really pretty much all the options in the BIOS. It would have been nice to have some options, a little bit more fine-grained control of USB 4 V2, and to be able to mess with the resource settings there, because that's what you can do manually on Linux, and get the external devices to work a little bit more reliably and avoid that whole, we don't really support adding a GPU thing. Now, do note that even though in a Linux context, I got some GPUs working and I can add some GPU devices, Minisforum, when I reached out to them, said they don't officially support either via the Thunderbolt compatibility, USB 4, USB 4 V2, or even the built-in PCIe slot. Yeah, not technically officially supported. And it's because of the resource allocation and the bar space, and they need somebody on the BIOS team to understand that to fix it. This is the Razer Thunderbolt 5 Chroma dock, and it is connected to our MS-S1 Max AI from Minisforum. It's the only Thunderbolt 5 device that I have. Is Thunderbolt 5 compatible with USB 4 V2? Yes, and in fact, I can get more than 4 gigabytes per second, which is the absolute theoretical maximum on Thunderbolt 4. Twice as fast, 80 gigabit. This dock even supports 120 gigabit mode. I got it to work in 8080. That's about all I can tell you. You might have seen we did a quick little video on this when it first launched. I think I posted that to Twitter and some other places, but Thunderbolt 5 dock, it has an M.2 port in it, and so I can do disk benchmarks for M.2 and see how fast the M.2 is. And it's pretty fast. So I'm happy to see this is the first AMD device with Thunderbolt 5, maybe? At least as far as I can test it with my Thunderbolt 5 Razer Chroma dock, which seems to work well on Windows and Macs. There's not a Mac that has Thunderbolt 5. That's crazy. Thunderbolt 5 compatible. But still, very nice. Let's take a look at the benchmarks. All right, Strix Halo, let's start with the games. And we've covered a lot of Strix Halo platforms. We got a lot of comparison data. I picked the Framework Desktop so we can look and see how this thing stacks up to the Framework Desktop. And we'll start with Clair Obscur. So at 4K, Clair Obscur, can you actually play? Well, not really. Not unless you do upscaling or anything else like that. 20 FPS. 1440p, 34 FPS. It is surprisingly playable, but at 1440p, you're really going to want to run at like medium or medium settings, and you can get a higher frame rate. 1080p, 50 to 55 FPS, give or take. 36 FPS for our 1% lows, the medium preset. Not bad. Final Fantasy Dawn Trail, 4K at the high preset, 48 FPS, really? 27%, 27%, 27 FPS for your 1% lows. Could be better. 1440p, 68 FPS with 36 frames for your 1% lows on the high preset. Your 1% lows will get, it's not bad. It's pretty good. 1080p, 114 FPS. Yes, this is what we're talking about. 47% for the 1% lows. Things wandering out of cache, right? But this is a really good result for an APU. Monster Hunter Wilds, 26 FPS, 43 FPS at 1440p, and 54 FPS at 1080p on the Ultra preset. You can get well over 60 FPS at anything under the Ultra preset. I always like to test Shadow of the Tomb Raider, even though it's ancient at this point, just to see how it does. And 1080p, 127 FPS, buttery smooth at the highest preset. Now, even though it is ancient, it's still a lot of fun to play on the Minisforum MS-S1 Max. 125 FPS. Framework Desktop's pulling a little ahead here, but the Minisforum MS-S1 Max is also, kind of quiet, has a lot more going on. So it's within margin of error. Even 4K at 40 FPS, if you turn that down from highest to medium or medium-ish, you're going to be over 60 FPS on Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 4K. On an APU, 1440p, it's about 88, 86 FPS, something like that. Basically identical performance here between the two platforms. It's within margin of error. Slight edge. If you look at the overall benchmarks, the Framework Desktop has a very, very slight edge. And that maybe makes sense. It's a little bit physically larger. It has a different cooling system, a little bit different setup. Framework Desktop, the one miss is the PCIe slot. It's X4 and it's not open-ended and it can't deliver 75 watts. So even if you Dremel the end of the connection open, the motherboard wasn't designed to deliver 75 watts to the PCIe slot, which is what you need for a GPU. Now, in addition to the AI performance being right where we expect, and actually technically even better than any of the other Strix Halo platforms we reviewed, because ROCm 7 just launched, and ROCm 7, even on Windows, or especially on Windows, is now outperforming the Vulkan backend by a token or two per second in the, almost 40 tokens per second theoretical max best for some of the testing that we did with LM Studio. But let's take a look at AIDA64 and just see what we're working with. Our AIDA64 results are right in line with where we'd expect them, 117.8 gigabytes per second with a latency of 153.0. I always feel like that there's room for improvement for the latency, but 117.8 gigabytes, and so you might be thinking, wait a minute, I thought you said it was that this platform can do over 200 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth, and it's like, that's true. That's more in the GPU context of this, the APU, GPU, and CPU together. The pathway from memory to the GPU portion of the APU can do over 200 gigabytes per second. But this is still a substantial uplift. On a dual channel platform, you're not going to see, it would be tough for you to see on an AM5 platform on the order of 120 gigabytes per second delivered to the core with all but the very fastest DDR5 and Fabric speeds. In this case, we're running the equivalent of DDR5 8000. And that can be a little tough to achieve on an AM5 type platform. And this is bandwidth to the cores. When we're running AI stuff and when we're running APU gaming type stuff, you've got double that bandwidth to the GPU side of things. If you use the GPU to cleverly load things in memory and the GPU to do actual computation and then shove those computations off to the CPU core, then you benefit from the ridiculous memory speed. Not bad. Although, we need more bandwidth to the cores. Always like to do Blender benchmarks. Now, here in our Blender benchmarks, the 395 from Minisforum is pulling a little ahead of our Framework Desktop. It's sort of the opposite of the gaming performance, where the gaming had a very, very slight edge on the Framework Desktop. Blender for the junk shop, it's the same story, as is Monster. If we look at the GPU-oriented tests, then the Framework Desktop is pulling very slightly ahead. This may be down to BIOS tuning. Same with Junk Shop, and same with Monster. So there's probably some tuning that can be done in the BIOS to give you a little bit more GPU priority than CPU priority, and that's the difference between these two platforms, really. Cinebench R23 multi-core, the Minisforum MS-S1 Max, 37,062 points, and I never would have thought we would see this kind of performance in an APU just a couple of years ago. This is substantial performance. Even our single-core performance of just over 2,000 is very impressive from a combined, APU type system. Cinebench 24, 1789 versus 1690. Single core is a little slower here on the Minisforum MS-S1 Max.
and the single core performance is very, very similar. Our Geekbench single core scores are very similar between the two platforms. The MS-S1 Max is pulling a little ahead of the Framework Desktop, and for multi-core, the MS-S1 Max is pulling a fair bit ahead. This may be down to power limit, power configurations, but it was a little faster than the Framework Desktop. I was a little surprised by this result. So we test the GPU with Geekbench 6, and the Framework Desktop is pulling a little ahead of the MS-S1 for GPU, but for Vulkan, the MS-S1 is pulling a little ahead of the Framework Desktop. It's a very interesting results. For Puget Bench, After Effects, 7,000, almost 8,000 on an APU. This is a really good result. Photoshop, a little over 10,000, almost 11,000 on the MS-S1, and Premiere Pro, the MS-S1 Max is pulling a little ahead of the Framework Desktop. And again, this is probably just down to BIOS settings or software optimizations, power. These are some of the later benchmarks we were getting into, and it's like, oh, there is actually more of a difference between these platforms than I thought. This can probably be worked out by just tuning in the BIOS, because Minisforum does give you a lot of options in terms of, 130 watts, 150 watts, 160 watts for what you want to target, and fan profiles.
Now, what if we tear down this system? Well, that's what this little clip thing is for. This helps you unlock and get it to back and kind of slide it out. I probably could have just used gravity, but that's cool. Inside, you've got that physical X16 expansion slot. It's only 4 lanes electrical, but it is PCIe Gen 4. You could adapt that to an Oculink adapter or something like that. I always like to test. We've done our other Minisforum reviews. This is a similar form factor to what Minisforum has had for their more powerful machines. This is a little thicker, a little taller, twice as tall. And so I always like to test, what about a ConnectX-5 NIC? This is a dual port 25 gig NIC. Can the built-in cooling keep this cool? Because it didn't really do that on previous versions of the Minisforum machines. And it is still also not quite enough cooling to keep this cool. 4 lanes. We've also got 2 USB 4 ports, which is 80 gigabits in both directions, or 120 gigabit one way and 40 gigabit the other, I think. I don't have a chipset that does that, so that's a maybe, maybe not kind of thing. But I can tell you it does work with our Cooler Master Thunderbolt dock, so it's Thunderbolt compatible. All that works in Windows, on either the front or the rear USB 4 ports. So there's a total of 4 ports here. They also do DisplayPort Alt mode. It can also do 15 watts charging. So it's really... Minisforum has put a lot of engineering into this platform, which I like to see. Also, internally, there's a header that lets you chain these together. One of the things Minisforum noticed is that when they're putting together these small form factor PCs, people are building clusters out of these. They're buying 2, 3, 4, 5 of these and connecting them together. Even the USB 4 ports cross-connecting nodes so that you have a high-speed interface between machines without using a network port. The software support for that has improved. It's a little janky. I don't know that I would depend on it commercially, but for a home lab, it can work. It's fine. You're building a fully connected mesh with USB 4 ports. And with this, you can build a 5-node cluster using all of your USB 4 connectivity. Real world node to node is going to be on the order of 10 to 15 gigabit, but real world fully connected mesh, 10 to 15 gigabit between each node without actually using your hardwired 10 gig ports, that's pretty good. There's another header in there that lets you daisy chain power. So if you turn on one of your cluster members, they will all turn on. This could be handy if you have something like a PiKVM or something like that has external power button control. You can hook up a jumper cable to this. And so if you have a remote management thing that's connected to the HDMI port that you can remote into over the internet, you can use that to physically toggle the power button on and off. And that will work not just for one of these, but for as many as you want to daisy chain connect together. So again, there's little hardware features here and little quality of life improvements from Minisforum in case you want to use it in that configuration. There's 4 threaded screw holes on the bottom, so you can mount this as part of a shelf or something like that. You can stack 2 of these on top of each other and have another pair over here, and then that fits in a 2U rack shelf. Really absurdly short depth. Again, creative, a lot of fun, a lot of interesting stuff. Let's get this thing configured and show you what you can do on the AI side of things in Windows. To say nothing of the Linux capabilities. The Linux capabilities are a whole other conversation, which is also awesome. Okay, if you have Strix Halo and you want to get up and running with Comfy UI, this applies to pretty much any Strix Halo platform. If you've got a machine like the HP G1A, or the ROG Flow Z13. This is also Strix Halo. This is also 128 gigabytes of memory. This is also an absurdly fun platform to play with. It also has USB 4 and HDMI out, and it is a ridiculous amount of horsepower. You should check out the subreddit for all the folks going crazy with Flow Z13. It takes a certain kind. It's a certain kind of interesting machine. It's the tablet form factor, but it's got some heft to it. It's got more heft than like second generation Microsoft Surface, but it's also 128 gigabytes of memory and can run 70 billion parameter AI models and beats the pants off of anything that you could run on any NPU on basically any portable machine. So sort of nuts for a portable battery self-contained machine, portable gaming. Yeah, it's 4060M level graphics performance from that APU, which is just absurd. So our how-to here is going to work whether you've got this or another mini PC or the one from Minisforum, but I'm debuting the guide in our Minisforum video because, hey, why not? Now, to be sure, I'm going to go a little fast here, but you can follow along with the guide in the forum. It's not a big deal. Windows, we don't even need the Windows subsystem for Linux. This is totally fresh out of the box. Windows 11 install. It's got the drivers updated, the latest Adrenaline drivers. That is sort of important that you have the latest AMD drivers, latest chipset drivers. When you get this unpacked and out of the box, you might be a version or two behind on your AMD Adrenaline driver. That's not Minisforum's fault. That's nothing bad. You just need to go update your driver. And then you're going to want to install Git for Windows. Git for Windows from git-scm.com. This is version control. This is a fun thing if you're a programmer. If you're getting into AI, you're going to have to learn how to use this. If you're a budding computer science student and your parents or somebody got you this as a platform so that you can do fun AI, interesting stuff, this is a perfectly reasonable and good platform for that. Yeah, there's a lot of fun. You're going to need to get into version control. That's a whole other conversation. Then we're going to need UV. UV is, I think, the least bad Python virtual environment system for controlling different Python versions. Python is a programming language. One of the interesting aspects of Python is that things will change in the language. Like, they're not really bashful about breaking things in the language. And generally, they're pretty good about not breaking things in the language. But sometimes new features are introduced to the language, and the version of the language that you're using is important. And in the AI space, I've never seen anything move so fast. So the versions of things matter kind of a lot. UV lets you manage that. Like I said earlier, we're using Python 3.12. That's the version that I'm using. And so you'll have to follow the guide and set up UV and then set up a Python virtual environment and use that to install Python 3.12 and the dependencies from the system. Now, we're using Comfy UI, and Comfy UI wants you to get Torch and Torch Vision and other Python components. I'm really skipping over a lot of details here, and I'm doing you a terrible disservice not going into like the full background and history. I mean, it's like some Game of Thrones stuff. It's pretty wild. But those components for Python were originally designed for CUDA, and CUDA is an NVIDIA thing. We're getting CUDA. Well, no, we're not really getting CUDA. We're getting Torch that has been set up. We're getting versions of these Python modules that are ROCm and AMD. And so we're going to open requirements. We're going to delete the lines from the requirements file that have to do with Torch, because we're going to get them from AMD, basically. Then we're going to drop to a terminal and run some commands to preemptively install the stuff that we took out of the requirements file, because we want to specify where it came from. That's what those commands do. And then we're going to reinstall our Python requirements for Comfy, for our system here. Then we're going to get the web component of Comfy UI so that you can actually explore and do other stuff. And so that's the next part of the guide. That's the next thing that we're going to do. Comfy UI Manager, in other words. And then from there, we just need to run UV on main.py to start the whole thing, and it's going to continue running in the terminal. Understand that the program is running in the terminal, but the terminal creates a little mini web server that's accessible on your local machine. You can open this up to the LAN too, so that other people on your internal network, or other people in your home, or other people wherever in your dorm, wherever you're running this, can access it. But for now, it's just on localhost. And so if you load localhost :8188 in your browser, HTTP, not HTTPS, because it's not secure, because it's a local site, comfy UI. You can use comfy UI, and it's running on your Rockham platform. Now, when mine initialized, again, completely out of the box defaults for Minisforum here, and the Adrenaline drivers, everything's up to date, it detected that it had 50 gigabytes of VRAM available to it, which is a pretty good amount of, 50 gigabytes, goodness. And in the BIOS on the Minisforum, it's configured with 2 gigabytes reserved. And so with this configuration, only 2 gigabytes of the 128 gigabytes is exclusively reserved for the GPU. And then Windows knows that it has another 62-ish max gigabytes of memory available in a shared fashion for AI stuff. Comfy UI and the underlying libraries and things here have reasonably been updated to be aware of shared GPU memory. Sometimes you might run this AI stuff and it would say, oh, you've only got 2 gigs of VRAM. That's not enough. If you run into that, you can go into the BIOS and you can change the reserved amount to 16 or 32 or 64 gigs. But generally in 2025, it's not really required. And it's not required on Linux, on the Linux side of things. On Linux, you could reserve 512 megabytes, half a gigabyte. And Linux is still able to function with games, and games will run at 60 FPS, 1080p, and allocate 8 gigabytes of VRAM and run fine. Windows is almost there. Windows is a little behind Linux, in my opinion, for the whole shared dedicated VRAM detection and how that works. And it's also a little weird between NVIDIA and how it does VRAM stuff and how the shared VRAM stuff works on the AMD side. But again, that's another separate conversation. And it's not quite the Game of Thrones level of insanity, but it's you can get into some complicated stuff. And so from here, comfy UI, and you're running, and everything is good. Now, if you're running other software like LM Studio works pretty well out of the box now. One nice thing with the launch of Rockham 7 is LM Studio supports different backends, CUDA, and we talked about HIP with Rockham. Rockham under the hood is HIP. There's also Vulkan. Vulkan is, wait, isn't that a game API? Yes, it is. Good on you for learning words and paying attention while you're doing game stuff. It's like, oh, Vulkan. I love Doom Eternal is like one of the shining poster children of super optimized Vulkan gaming interface things. With LM Studio, a lot of the time up till now, if you use the Vulkan backend, it would perform the best on AMD hardware. But with Rockham 7 and RDNA, we're getting into a point where the HIP backend, as part of the Rockham thing, is starting to perform better, and significantly better in some cases, than Vulkan. And so depending on what you're running, you may want to experiment with that. LM Studio GPT OSS 120 billion, 120B, that is one of the largest models, AI models that you can run on this. And that is a 120 billion parameter model. It's 120 billion 4-bit parameters. It's going to use on the order of 60 gigabytes of VRAM, 64-ish, 63, 64, and depending on your context window, that will also use more memory. Just to really quickly show you a couple interesting things in LM Studio. First, GPT OSS 120 billion. Like I said, load it, run, it's great. 30 plus tokens per second. 36 to 38-ish tokens per second. 36 on the Vulkan backend. 37, 38 on the Rockham backend. This is a first. Like I say, Rockham faster than Vulkan on Windows. It's even a little faster on Linux. That's really good. GPT OSS, of course, is natively 4-bit, or I guess ships 4-bit natively. Is probably not technically natively, but the 4-bit version is good and what they shipped. So it's about 60 gigabytes, and it uses all of the VRAM, all of the layers offloaded onto the GPU. If you run it on the CPU, it's going to be about half as fast because the CPU cores don't have quite the same access to fast memory that the GPU does. There's a different bottleneck in there. Now, other models like Qwen 3, the thinking model, the one that just came out, 2507, that is a 4 billion parameter thinking model. It's like, oh, it's only 4 billion parameters. It's going to be absurdly fast. Now, keep in mind, this is LPDDR5. It's not fast video memory. It's still 200 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth. So this 4 billion parameter model is only about 26 tokens per second. And we know that it's running on the GPU, not the CPU, because in Task Manager, the compute is happening on the GPU. It's in the graph. You can see it. But it thought for 3 minutes about my perfect number question before answering. It really is a thinking model. It burned through 6,000 tokens, even though it's a smaller model. But this is still pretty reasonable performance for this platform. Let's see what happens with the old RTX 6000, huh? You know, connect that. It's like 96 gigs of VRAM. Does Mr. Data fall out of that because we've got CUDA and ROCm and Vulkan in one platform? I mean, that's sort of the ultimate thing, right? On the Linux side for AI, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. The AI functionality on Linux and Windows is similar, but they're not perfectly at parity. And depending on what you're doing and what you want to do, one may be a better choice than the other. However, AMD has committed to an amazing PyTorch experience and an amazing Python experience, and treating Windows development, native Windows development, not just WSL, as a first-class citizen. I learned that at Computex in 2025. That was around June of 2025, from the man himself at AMD. There's a whole other video on that. You can hear his thoughts in his own words. But I kind of get it, seeing this now on Windows. I still prefer Linux, and this thing runs Linux like something special. And actually, Strix Halo in general is probably the best Linux desktop experience that I have ever had. And it is so easy to be excited about that, because it's like, oh, this machine runs Linux better than anything that I've like. Linux is nice. But that's enough rambling for this video. This is the Minisforum MS-S1 Max AI. It's got a lot of features that are unique, at least for now, at the time that I'm doing this video. I'm really excited about this. Probably this is going to show up in some more videos, because we just Strix Halo everywhere. Strix Halo is a lot of fun. Ryzen AI Max 395 Plus. That's the marketing name, but under the hood, the code name Strix Halo. We've got I really like, what's the next generation? What comes after this? I don't know. I'm Widowless Level 1. This has been a quick look at the MS-S1 Max AI from Minisforum. It is something special. I'm signing out, and you can find me in the Level 1 forums. If you want me to run something or do a test or whatever, hit me up there. We'll figure it out. It'll be a lot of fun.